The subject that we're going to be dealing with today and for several more sessions to come, as I was working on this, was getting a little bit nervous because I thought I was going to do one on the attacks on the spirit of prophecy and another one on the rejection of the spirit of prophecy within those 20 points that we've been looking at. And the more I worked on it, the more I realized that my problem is not going to be dealing with material to present, but what material to leave out. It's that bad. And so I'm combining the attacks and the rejection together in what's actually going to be a mini-series within this series. And as I worked on this the last few days, I realized it's going to probably take us at least a dozen or close to that many sermons to look at all of the rejections of the spirit of prophecy among God's remnant people. A long time ago, the remnant prophet said something very, very important that we must come to understand. The very last deception of Satan will to make of none effect the testimony of the Spirit of God. Where there is no vision, the people perish, quoting Proverbs 29:18. Satan will work ingeniously in different ways and through different agencies to unsettle the confidence of God's remnant people in the true testimony. Now when we look at this is sad, but it should also be exciting, because when does he do this? This is his very last deception. We're close to going home, friends. We really are. We are definitely closer now than when we first believed. She goes on and says, there will be a hatred kindled against the testimonies, which is satanic. The workings of Satan will be to unsettle faith of the churches in them. For this reason, Satan cannot have so clear a track to bring in his deceptions and bind up souls in his delusions if the warnings and reproofs and counsels of the Spirit of God are heeded. It's quite a strong statement, a very insightful declaration from the Spirit of the living God to us today. And I want you to notice there that it says, and bind up souls in his delusions if the warnings and reproofs and counsels are heeded. You see, if we would but heed the warnings God has sent us, the devil would be far away from us right now. But because we have not, he is working mightily among the remnant church. We already are familiar with Revelation 12:17. It says that the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with who? Who is that? That's us. So we should not be surprised of all of this warfare that's going on, this spiritual warfare within the church of the living God, because the devil is making war with us, and we are the ones who keep the commandments of God and have what? The testimony of Jesus Christ. And the testimony of Jesus is what? The spirit of prophecy, Revelation 19:10. So should we be shocked or surprised? No. One of the great things that Satan hates is this gift within the remnant church. Because he knows if we would follow the scripture and the counsel that God has given us in his last day prophet, that his hands would be pretty well tied. It's only when we turn away from inspiration that we can fall prey to the wiles of the devil. You know, I was going to share some of the various things that have gone on, and I've decided not to do much of that. I'm going to give you just a few examples, and then what we're going to do in this section of the series is we're just going to look at what God said and whether or not we are doing what God said. But I do want to share a couple of things so that you will be aware of the hatred and the animosity that goes on here. We'll see a little later in the series where she talks about people in her days even taking her writings and burning them. Seventh-day Adventists. So should we be surprised? Remember, the Omega is just a greater impact of what was the Alpha. It just grew until it's become what it is today. You know, several years back already, I know of one pastor, he wanted to have an illustration, and so he put a wastebasket right there by the pulpit. And he gets in the pulpit and he holds up Spirit of Prophecy writing. I don't remember which book it was now. Probably doesn't even matter. He'd have done it with any of them. And he holds it up and says, "We don't need this stuff." And he threw it in the wastebasket. I think the poor soul does not understand the ramifications that God will forgive all manner of sin except the sin against the Holy Spirit. And that's what that was. And it's not an isolated case. There's others of those things that have gone on. Years ago, I was in another conference, and the youth pastor of the academy there were telling the people, "Oh, you don't need to listen to the writings of that little old woman. That was 100 years ago, and it has no bearing upon us today." And I believe that academy is now closed even. And he's in prison. I've sat at meetings, general conference meetings and union meetings, in ministerial sessions, where we have worldwide leaders or people from high offices within the church that talk about how Ellen White is not a theologian. Well, you know, after all, she's not a theologian. She's a good commentator, but she really doesn't know the theological issues. Well, I think she knew the theological issues better than our so-called theologians and scholars who today trample upon the Word of God. Some of you may remember, I know some of you do remember, I was talking to somebody about this not long ago. 1990, Indianapolis, Indiana, General Conference session. And there were some independent ministries out there that were standing all over the streets of Indianapolis, handing out the Great Controversy. By the way, they're going to do it in San Antonio too, and they should. But our pressman from the General Conference said, when people began to question about that, "Oh, that's the way the church used to believe back in the days when there was so much anti-Catholicism in this country, but we now resign that to the trash heap of history." I'm not ready to throw the Great Controversy into the trash heap of history. I don't know about you. These are things that are going on. These are attacks upon the Spirit of prophecy that have brought about the rejection of these things. And so I'm going to basically, unlike most, I'm going to be looking at exactly what warnings we received and what we were told to do and whether or not we do it. In this inspired statement here from Special Testimonies, it says, "I have been instructed that unless there is a decided change in the religious experience of those who have refused to heed the warnings given them, but who instead remain willingly under the molding influence which now predominates at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, it will not be of the least use to explain everything that is presented as an objection to the visions." Do you see this? This is in the Alpha setting, with Kellogg and some of the other church leaders now questioning the Spirit of prophecy back then. Some have been under Kellogg's influence for years, and the many subterfuges and explanations that are resorted to there will be taken up by those misled souls and used against the testimonies. So long as they refuse to heed the warnings given them, the spell that is upon them cannot be broken. God has a work that must be carried forward purely and intelligently in His own way, entirely separated from the influence of seducing spirits that some have communion with. If it was happening in the Alpha, should we be surprised that it has even increased in the Omega? Again, God told us all the way back in Deuteronomy that He would rise up a prophet. And I want you to see the application of this in the spirit of prophecy, as well as the prophecy of Jesus and others. Anytime God raises up a prophet, remember, the prophet is the mouthpiece of God. God says, I will raise him up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. That's an awesome warning, friends. An awesome warning of almost 3,500 years ago. God says when He raises up someone to speak for Him, and that person brings His words to His people, if the people do not listen, well, you can figure out what it means when He says, I will require it of him. I don't want to personally find out what that is. I mean, that's to me is stronger than when my parents use my middle name when they talk to me. We as parents do that. You know that? That's why we have middle names, so that we'll know when we're in trouble. Because they tend to use all of our names when they're not happy. Again, notice this from selected messages. Very important here. There are some who think they are able to measure the character and to estimate the importance of the work of the Lord has given me to do. Their own mind and judgment is the standard by which they would weigh the testimonies. So they're going to do what they want according to what they think rather than what God has said. Here it is. My instructor, who was her instructor? That's why it's capitalized. Said to me, tell these men that God has not committed to them the work of measuring, classifying, and defining the character of the testimonies. Those who attempt this are sure to err in their conclusions. The Lord would have men adhere to their appointed work. If they will keep the way of the Lord, they will be able to discern clearly that the work which He has appointed me to do is not a work of human devising. Those who carefully read the testimonies as they have appeared from the early days, and remember, she wrote these things over more than 70 years for us. And she says, if you'll just read them as they've appeared from the early days, they need not be perplexed as to their origin. The many books written by the help of the Spirit of God bear a living witness to the character of the testimonies. But you see, like ancient Israel, when God sent messages through the prophets, they would not listen. They wanted to do their own thing. Eventually, it brought about the fall of Israel. Notice again, going back to the book of Jeremiah, we looked at a few verses the last time we were together, but notice this call here. Obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people, and walk ye in the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well unto you. Does that sound like an unfair thing for God to say? But notice what He goes on and says. But they hearkened not, nor inclined their ear, but walked in the counsels and in the imagination of their evil heart, and they went backward and not forward. Friends, I want to tell you, we've been backtracking faster than most people can go forward on anything. Just kept sliding back and back and back because we would not hearken. We did not want to hear what God says. But you know, God over all of these years still has not cast us aside. I'm thankful that we have a long-suffering God, that He is patient with us, Notice again, God speaks through his appointed agencies, and let no man or confederacy of men insult the Spirit of God by refusing to hear the message of God's words from the lips of his chosen messengers. By refusing to hear the message of God, men close themselves in a chamber of what? Notice now. They shut their own souls away from vast blessings and rob Christ of his glory that should come to him by showing disrespect to his appointed agencies. Do you ever think about that? By showing disrespect to God's appointed agencies to bring the word to them, they show disrespect to God himself. This is what is going on. Friends, we are in reality, as we were told many years ago, repeating the very history of Israel. And you can see it in so many aspects of what's happening to us today. Zechariah put it this way. But before we look at Zechariah, look at this. Again, this is from the 1888 Message material, page 1062. When evidence is given that a man is a messenger of the Lord of hosts, that he speaks in God's stead, it is perilous to the soul to reject and despise the message. Here she's dealing primarily with Jones and Wagner's message of righteousness by faith, which we will look at quite a bit in weeks to come. He goes on and says, to turn away from heaven's light and refuse the light bearer is to take a course similar to that which Satan took in the courts of heaven when he created rebellion in the ranks of the angels. He misrepresented the character of God and placed in a false light his gracious commandments. He evaded the truth and subtly worked to make good appear as evil and evil as good. He has lost none of his tact, and through his agents manifests the same diplomacy and skill in evading truth, in creating false issues, in misrepresenting the message and the messenger. Not only do we see his workings in the world among those who openly oppose the truth, but also in the church his art is manifested in the divisions and controversies among those who profess to be the children of God. Now, look at the comparison from Zechariah. They refused to hearken and pulled away the shoulder and stopped their ears that they should not hear. Yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone, lest they should hear the law and the words which the Lord of hosts has sent in his Spirit. We're going to see that that's exactly what we did do. You see, again, there are times when important movements must be made in a crisis that the Lord permits. The development of an evil work which has long been in minds and hearts. The work of advancement in the proclamation of truth at such times been greatly hindered by specious workings, which are the Alpha of the Omega, which means very much to the people who are in any way connected with parties who have received the warnings of the Lord, but refuse to what? That's the Alpha. We are in the Omega. Friends, do we understand that there is a horrendous thing happening around us? And I pray that it doesn't happen to us individually. You see, they refuse to heed them. We oftentimes look at a passage in 2 Thessalonians and we just want to apply that to the papacy. But I want us to apply that to us today. Those who with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. Why? Because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. You see, friends, if you don't have a love for the truth, you will be lost. Does that make sense? It's not just having a theoretical assent to some kind of knowledge. And for this cause, because they don't love the truth, watch this, God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe what? A lie. That they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. What a statement. But I do believe that Paul, being the mouthpiece for God at that time, said it exactly the way that God wanted it said. Watch just a couple more before we close here today. Many now despise the faithful reproof given of God in testimony. I have been shown that some in these last days have even gone so far as to burn the written words of rebuke and warning, as did the wicked king of Israel. But opposition to God's threatenings will not hinder their execution. To defy the words of the Lord spoken through his chosen instruments will only provoke his anger and eventually bring certain ruin upon the offender. Indignation often kindles in the heart of the sinner against the agent whom God chooses to deliver his reproof. It has ever been thus. And the same spirit exists today that persecuted and imprisoned Jeremiah for obeying the word of the Lord. You know, you may remember that Ahab, they wanted a prophet to come and prophesy to them. And they've had all these false prophets come in. And finally Ahab says, well, don't you have any other prophet? Oh yeah, we got another one. But he never says what we want to hear. Everybody said, go out and fight and you'll win. He says, I want to hear the one you don't want me to hear. And they brought him in and he said very clearly, don't go out. Because if you do, you will die. Well, they listened to the multitude of false prophets instead of the one that God really sent. And they went out and they did die. Where there is no vision, the people what? Perish. You see, we have begun to incorporate programs and procedures previously rejected from the churches of Babylon, but they're readily received within our church today. We are inviting men and women from the churches of Babylon to train and teach our leaders and our youth. And these churches are the ones who are constantly and persistently warring against the commandments of God. They are the ones who are openly opposing and attacking the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this is in complete disregard to every bit of counsel in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. And so what we're going to pick it up here with the next time is, have we rejected divine inspiration concerning separation? Separation from Babylon, separation from the world. We're going to, like I said, look at least a dozen different things. And unlike many of those, we're going to look at what God had said and what we are actually doing. Friends, start studying. Read. Know for yourself what these issues are that surround us. Because these closing scenes will be what? Rapid ones. There are many who will be sitting in the pews, not even aware that the loud cry and the latter rain is falling about them. There are many who think that they can ride a pew to heaven. It doesn't happen. We will go to heaven because we have been faithful to God and to His Word, and not doctrines of devils and cunningly devised fables. So study, and we will pick it up here the next time as we look at whether or not we've been faithful in following God's instruction on several issues, but the one we will start with, and we'll probably do more than one per week, and see just exactly where we are in this world.